Hey everyone, I went to Italy and I bought some books, so let's talk about them. There was a store with a selection of Italian classic authors, and of course I had to get myself some books. So I'll show them to you, I'll tell you what they're about, and then we are going to read an excerpt. The first one I got myself is The Story of My Life by Giacomo Casanova. I actually couldn't wait, and while touring Italy and going from city to city, I actually finished this novel. I also had the Divine Comedy going, so it was a mix of reading this book and then the Divine Comedy, which was amazing. This is a memoir and an autobiography that Casanova himself has written, and the original manuscript is 3,500 pages long. Penguin Classics did an edition, some sort of abridged edition, and here and there in the book there's this cursive writing that tells us what was going on from one moment to another moment. So the moments that they skip from the original autobiography, they said in cursive, and they kind of give you a summary of what happened. This was an amazing biography. I loved every single page of it. It was so interesting, and the writing itself was really good. I highly recommend it if you're interested in life in the 1700s in France and in Italy, because Casanova traveled a lot during his lifetime. He stayed a long period of his life in France and Paris, but he also traveled Italy itself. This is what the back of the book says. Seducer, gambler, necromancer, swindler, good Samaritan, spy, swashbuckler, self-made gentleman, entrepreneur, wit, poet, translator, philosopher, and general bon vivant. Giacomo Casanova was not only the most notorious lover the Western world has ever known, but a storyteller of the first order, which is absolutely true. Since he lived a life richer and stranger than most fictions, the account of his adventures is his most compelling tale, but his memoir remained at 12 volumes unfinished at the time of his death in 1798. In these selections made from French texts, all are the highlights of Casanova's life. His youth in Venice as a precocious ecclesiastic, carousing and dabbling in the occult, imprisonment and thrilling escape, encounters with major literary figures and world leaders, and of course many amorous conquests, ranging from noblewomen to nuns to cobblers' daughters, all of them willing partners in the adventures of his life. And indeed, this biography really reads like a novel. It is super interesting. Highly recommend it. The second book I got myself, and I was immediately interested because it's an Everyman's Library edition. I love those. I love the cover. I love the cover of this one too. It's so beautiful. It's actually from a French painting that's in the Louvre Museum in Paris. So, back to the Everyman's Library. This is a translation by J.G. Nichols. And the summary says, in the summer of 1348, with the plague ravaging Florence, 10 young men and women take refuge in the countryside. There they entertain one another for 10 days with tales of love, lust, death, and deception. Named after the Greek for 10 days, Boccaccio's Decameron blends myth, history, and everyday life into a treasury of tragic, comic, and outrageously bawdy stories which have influenced writers and painters ever since. He was one of the most important authors of his time in Italy, next to Dante and Petrarch. They were all foundational figures of Italian literature. It was written between 1348 and 1353, a very long time ago, and apparently it is a collection of 100 short stories told by a group of 10 young people, 7 women and 3 men, who flee Florence to escape the Black Death. So we are supposed to get a vivid portrayal of the 14th century Italy while the Black Plague was reigning. He had a huge influence on the writers who came after him, and he introduced a new way of storytelling, the short story. So I'll go ahead and read an excerpt later. The final book that I got myself is by Alessandro Manzoni, The Betrothed. Also absolutely in love with this cover. It is by Penguin Classics as well, and let me see, the translator is Bruce Penman. So this is what the back of the book says. Set in Lombardy during the Spanish occupation of the late 1620s, The Betrothed tells the story of two young lovers, Renzo and Lucia, prevented from marrying by the petty tyrant Don Rodrigo, who desires Lucia for himself. Forced to flee, they are then cruelly separated, must face many dangers including plague, famine, and imprisonment, and confront a variety of strange characters. The mysterious nun of Monza, the fiery Father Cristoforo, and the sinister unnamed in their struggle to be reunited. A vigorous portrayal of enduring passion, this novel's exploration of love, power, and faith presents a whirling panorama of 17th century Italian life and is one of the greatest European historical novels. Super excited to get into this one. And what have I found about this novel? It was published in 1827 and it is considered also to be one of the greatest novels of Italian literature. Okay, so now I would like to read a part of these novels for you, and we are going to explore the writing style and find out more. I'm going to start with Alessandro Manzoni's. One arm of Lake Como turns off to the south between two unbroken chains of mountains, which cut it up into a series of bays and inlets as the hills advance into the water and retreat again until it quite suddenly grows much narrower and takes on the appearance and the motion of a river between a headland on one side and a wide stretch of shore on the other. The bridge which connects the two banks at that point seems to make the change of state still clearer to the eye, marking the spot where the lake comes to an end and the other comes into being once more, though further on it again takes the name of a lake, as the banks separate, allowing the water to spread out and lose its speed among more bays and fresh inlets. The stretch of shore we mentioned is formed by the silt from three considerable streams and is backed by two adjoining mountains, one known as St. Martin's Mount and the other by the Lombard-sounding name of Resegon, because of the many small peaks that make up its skyline, which do in fact give it the look of a soul. This is enough of a distinctive sign to make the Resegon easy to pick out from the long and vast chains of other mountains, less well known by name and less strange in shape, in which it lies, even if the observer has never seen it before, provided that he sees it from an angle which shows its full length, as for example looking northward from the walls of Milan. The slope up from the water's edge is gentle and unbroken for quite a long way, but then it breaks up into mounds and gullies, terraces and steeper tracts, according to the geological structure of the two hills and the erosion of the waters. Okay, so let's stop here. Long sentences and a lot of nature description, so I am quite curious to know how it goes on, and doesn't feel too difficult to read. So yeah, that was a part of the first page. Let's proceed with Boccaccio. This is the beginning of the first day of the Decameron. The author explains why those people are shortly to appear have come together to talk with one another. Then each of them, under the guidance of Pompilia, speaks on that theme which he or she finds most agreeable. Since it crosses my mind, dear ladies, how tender you all are by nature, I realize that this present work will seem to you to be starting off very seriously, indeed unpleasantly. For I must begin with a sad recollection of the recent deadly plague, disastrous to all those who saw it or heard about it. But I should hate this to put you off from going any further, as if everything you read will be to the accompaniment of sighs and tears. No, as you approach this horrible beginning, you are like walkers faced with a steep and rugged mountain, beyond which there stretches a lovely, delightful plain, all the more pleasing after the difficulties of the climb and the descent. And just as happiness always ends in distress, so sorrow is overcome by joy. This brief trial, I call it brief because it can be expressed in few words, is followed immediately by that pleasure which I have promised to you, which you would not have expected from such a beginning if I had not mentioned it. And to tell the truth, if it had been possible in all honesty to take you where I want you to go by another route than one as rough as this, I would gladly have done so, but since it is impossible, without delving into the past, to show how the things you are about to read happened, I find myself compelled to set about it. I actually really love the sound of the sentences and how it is written and how it is translated. It feels very beautiful and poetic, and I think I'm gonna fall in love with this. I can already tell it is gonna be really good. Okay, so let's end the video with an excerpt from The Story of My Life by Casanova. In 1428, Don Jacobo Casanova, born at Zaragoza, capital of Aragon, and the natural son of Don Francisco, abducted Dona Ana Palafox from the convent the day after she had taken her vows. He was secretary to the king, Don Alfonso. He fled with her to Rome, where he spent a year in prison before Pope Martin III granted Dona Ana dispensation from her vows and his nuptial blessing, thanks to the intercession of Don Juan Casanova, uncle of Don Jacobo and master of the Holy Palace. All the children born of this marriage died at a young age, except for Don Juan, who in 1475 married Eleonora Albini, who bore him a son named Marcantonio. In 1481, Don Juan was forced to leave Rome after killing an officer of the King of Naples. He fled to Como with his wife and son, and later set off to seek his fortune. He died in 1493 while on a voyage with Christopher Columbus. Marcantonio became a good poet in the style of Martial and was secretary to Cardinal Pompeo Colonna. When he wrote a satire against Giulio de' Medici, which we can read among his poems, he was forced to return to Como, where he married a Bondia Resonica. The same Giulio de' Medici, when he became Pope Clement VII, pardoned Marcantonio and brought him back to Rome with his wife. There, after the city was captured and pillaged by imperial troops in 1526, he died of the plague. He would otherwise have died of poverty, for the soldiers of Charles V took everything he had. Piero Valeriano speaks of him at length in his book De Infelitate Literatorum. 3 years after his death, his wife gave birth to Giacomo Casanova, who died at a very young age in France, having served as a colonel in the army led by Alessandro Farnese against Henry, King of Navarre and later of France.